Hello again, everybody. My name is Josh Rhodes, and we welcome you again to the Retro Monster Truck Review. This week, special treat. We've got Chris Parrish on the show with us, along with Matt Stoltz, and we're going to be talking about one of the wildest events in monster truck racing history. I'm talking, of course, about Indianapolis inside the RCA Dome in 1989. Bigfoot 8 is here, Scott Hess and Barefoot is here, Steve Hess and Nightmare, and many, many more. As always, I've got to thank everybody for all the subscriptions, likes, and comments over on YouTube. The follows on Spotify and the Apple iTunes 5-star reviews really do help us out and push us out there for more eyeballs and more ears on our product here at the Retro Monster Truck Review. So thank you guys very much for doing that. Also, we want to wish everybody safe travels to the Hall of Fame this weekend, where you'll get to see the induction of Tim Hall, Mark Hall, John Moore, and Bobby Holman into the International Monster Truck Museum Hall of Fame. I unfortunately will not be able to make it, but several former guest hosts of the Retro Monster Truck Review and our main guest host, Mr. Matt Stoltz, will be there as well, so do stop in and say hi to him. I'm not going to hold you guys up, though, anymore. Like I said, this is a wild event, and I want to get right into it here on the Retro Monster Truck Review. Hello, one and all again, and welcome to the Retro Monster Truck Review. This week, we've got Matt Stoltz in the house. What's going on, Matt?
I'm doing good, sir. It's the hour of power today.
That is exactly right, it is. And on the other end of the spectrum, we've got a man that actually attended this event. Mr. Chris Parrish is back on the show.
Hey guys, great to be back. Always a joy to be on Retro Monster Truck. We rewind, and this one's close to my heart because I sat just a little bit beyond the end of the second set of cars for this event, and big event, home event for us, and I'm excited to talk about it.
You do realize, I know you've not been on the show for a little while, but it's the Retro Monster Truck Review, not the rewind.
Well, I'm rewinding back, and we'll review while I'm rewinding. So
please be kind, rewind.
Yes.
Yes, because the host just insults them right off the bat, and that's why you only get the one co-host every week.
Oh, okay. That's exactly it. There you go. This week we're talking special events inside the RCA Dome. Actually, at this point, it's still called the Hoosier Dome. The Hoosier Dome hosted the Indianapolis Colts from 1984 to 2007 before it was unfortunately destroyed. But in its place, we've got a really awesome stadium now, Lucas Oil Stadium. If you ever get a chance to go to one of those NFL games or Monster Jams that happens to go through that area, please do. That is a immaculate facility. Not saying the RCA Dome wasn't immaculate, but the place they've got now dwarfs it in size. It's a great floor for monster truck racing as well as football. But guys, at this place right here, like I said, 84 to 2007, home of the Indianapolis Colts. Colts brought home one Super Bowl through the RCA Dome route, and of course they unfortunately had to defeat my Chicago Bears to do so. But they won the AFC Championship game there, and that was probably the biggest thing to come to Indianapolis in a very long time. Other events that were held there, though, guys, we're all wrestling nerds. 1992, WrestleMania 8. Can you remember the main event?
No, that's before my time.
I got nothing.
Hulk Hogan versus Sid Vicious? Come on, guys. Macho Man Randy Savage versus Ric Flair, co-main event. The Ultimate Warrior returns, and you call yourselves wrestling nerds.
Well, I like the new stuff and Attitude Era, but are we talking Sid Vicious like the promo master?
This is Sid Justice. All right. This is Mr. Justice.
Well, the biggest thing to ever come into Indianapolis was the pride of Plum, PA, Pat McAfee, the boomstick.
There we go. After that, though, we've got before that, we've got the 1985 NBA All-Star Game. They actually held an attendance record for the NBA at the time of 43,146. Many NCAA men's division basketball games were held there, including 4 Final Fours, 91, 97, 2000, and 2006. 1 women's division Final Four in 2005. Men's track and field championships from 1989 to 1990. PBR actually did an event here in 2004. And probably one of the more famous things to hit the Dome, and Parrish probably knows a little bit about this, Thunder at the Dome midget car racing from 1985 to 2001.
Yeah, I remember hearing about it, never got to attend it, but I've seen little clips here and there, but not too dissimilar from what they do at I still call it the Edward Jones Dome, but they built a track indoors, flat track, and raced midget cars on it around the floor of the dome. So pretty neat deal there. And you can't forget monster trucks. Monster trucks have a long history there as well.
That they do. Hometown, by the way, of Gary Lee, the guy that's calling this event on our broadcast that we'll be covering. We also have to thank the International Monster Truck Hall of Fame as well for some home video footage that we were prevalent to be able to watch this as well, because there are a lot of jump cuts in this show, and you can't really see exactly what's happening in both lanes sometimes, but with that home video, it's very clear.
Definitely helps clarify a lot of what's occurring during this event. The RCA Dome and the Hoosier Dome, I still have a hard time not calling it the Hoosier Dome, but I kind of got spoiled growing up. This was my home event. I lived 45 minutes south of here, and so our home events were the Jamboree and the Hoosier Dome, and so this is one of my first big dome events. I went to the TNT event there in late '88 as well, and most of the PENDA events as well, along with some of the USA events. And though interestingly, never had USHRA until after the USA buyout, and they came in '99, I believe.
That's right.
Interesting to notice that, like, it was always a huge event, but never had that USHRA presence, but had a lot of other great quality events.
That it did. Matt, you go ahead.
No, I was just going to echo what Chris is saying there. It was cool that the city of Indianapolis got to see different promoters in this big building, and it's something you don't really see so much anymore. You know, back in the day, you had the Astrodome had TNT and USHRA every year. The Metrodome got USA and USHRA every year. The Hoosier Dome, special events, picked up kind of where TNT left off, and then USA had their show every year. Getting to see these different types of shows in the same facility really gave the people in that city a couple different flavors of the different styles of shows that were going on at the time. And I'll be honest, I'm super jealous.
Interestingly, and this perhaps is coming from, we'll call it a 7 to 10-year-old perspective, but you know, I probably knew more about monster trucks than my parents at the time. But we'd see the commercials. All right, that's how we learned about the events. And all right, let's get our tickets. Let's go. And it was always the biggest thrill walking in to see A, all the trucks lined up and which ones were there, and B, what track they were running. We never had any idea what the promoter was, but you started to figure out, in our case, we tended to prefer the special events show in November versus the USA show in February, because there was more emphasis on monster trucks in the November special events show. And so, not realizing what was happening, we were still picking up on the differences between the different promoters.
Just to run through a list of some of the things that happened in the late 80s and early 90s in this dome. Of course, 1987, the world famous race, Bigfoot Texas Toy, an unfortunate end-over-end crash for Bigfoot. By the way, look for Tim Richmond in that video if you ever get a chance, the famous NASCAR driver. 1988, Jim Cramer comes back behind the wheel of Bigfoot, gets his revenge over USA 1 kind of in the final, gets a nice clean pass down the track. And takes out Rod Litzow. 1991, Gary Porter clinches the Monster Truck Thunder Drags Championship, his first and only championship, if I remember correctly. 1995, Bigfoot number 15 meets the wall at the end of the track. As Parrish makes the crash thing right there. And then, of course, 1999, Dennis Anderson rolling Gravedigger number 12 in the final round against Scott Hartsock, gifting Hartsock a win inside the Indianapolis RCA Dome.
Yeah, I mean, it's a hallowed hall for sure. Probably not talked about as much as like your Silver Dome or Astrodome, but a lot of big moments and a lot of big shows happen inside this building. And this is one of the ones that's probably talked about less than others, but there's a lot of significance to it, Josh and Chris.
Yeah. Yeah, there absolutely is. And I think part of the reason, like you guys were talking earlier about the different promoters that came in, I think that's why it doesn't get talked about in the mainstream as much, because different promoters were coming into this venue, not just one every single year, like it would be later in the Dome's life.
That's right. So who do we've got in this show that's being filmed by the Bill Lineberger Productions Victory Films crew and airing on the Challenge of Power or Wheel Power, however you saw it in your market? Who do we got at this one?
We got Bigfoot number 8, Andy Brass behind the wheel. This is still blue Ford Bigfoot. There's no racer stripe on
The
this
truck
track
of the
yet.
future.
Yeah, there we go. Truck of the future. Nightmare 3, driven by Steve Hess. Barefoot 5, driven by Scott Hess. Hercules with Tim Tesmer. Holman's Beast, driven by, of course, Bobby Holman. Lone Ranger Gary Bauer. Thumper and Clint Daggett. And, of course, Heartbeat rounds out the field with Brent Engelman behind the wheel.
It's a strong lineup for the time. I mean, you've got 8 trucks in a Dome show. A lot of the big shows back then, you may only have 6 trucks. So a little extra treat for the people here in Indianapolis and some heavy hitters for sure.
That is true. And go ahead, Chris.
It was cool for us at that event because it was trucks that we hadn't really seen before. We may have been aware that they existed, but we hadn't seen them, like Heartbeat or even Holman's Beast, Thumper all the way from Florida up for this event, kind of out of market for them. And that's another thing. This is sort of an odd lineup for special events. Like, it doesn't fully fit the rest of the Triple Crown that they were doing in 1989, I don't think. I could be wrong, but I mean, I think Bigfoot was on the Triple Crown, but obviously Bigfoot 8 was new. Scott Hess in Barefoot, I don't think he had done anything with them before, but he was local, and there's a lot of local presence here. Trucks within 2 or 3 hours of Indianapolis, but it kind of created a unique lineup. And I've got to mention, at this event, so far I've counted 7 Hall of Famers present at this event. You've got 4 competing with Scott Hess, Andy Brass, Gary Bauer, and Bobby Holman, who's being inducted this year. But you also had lurking in the sidelines, George Carpenter, Bob Chandler, and unbeknownst to almost everybody, Fred Schaefer sitting in the stands just hoping to watch Hess beat the snot out of the brand new Bigfoot 8.
Boy, that's exclusive.
That is the big exclusive. I don't think I even knew Fred was there, honestly. The track that we have right here, though, is we got a unique lineup, but we also got a unique track, one that we really didn't see too much of. This is a 7-car jump at the start, a 10-car jump at the finish, but between each first and second car, there is a gap of another car right there. So essentially, it's an 8 and 11 car stack that we have right here. There's just a giant hole replacing where a car would be at. On these racing lanes right here. It's going to create some chaos, guys, because some of these trucks can't clear this first stack.
And Matt may be able to add more light to this, but I think this is one of the early situations where they've done the car gap, particularly on a two jump drags track. Perhaps we've seen it before. I know we saw it in the Silver Dome with the USHRA, maybe just a month or 2 earlier, but they had a lot of run-up space, where here you've got this first jump, and like you said, it causes chaos because there's a gap there, and while the lineup is neat, there's definitely a gap between the competitiveness of the different trucks.
Yeah, for sure. You know, we've got the latest and greatest with Bigfoot 8 and the high horsepower of Scott Hess's Barefoot truck, but we've got what's basically still a show truck here with Lone Ranger. The Beast is getting more and more competitive as the months go on, but it's still Bobby's original chassis as well. So you've got a good cross section of monster truck history right here at this event, and that gap, you know, special events puts it in the cars to kind of push the drivers, make sure they go for it. Well, some of the guys, even they go for it and they still can't quite get over it just because the trucks are so heavy and they're geared so low.
Yeah, very true. For the sake of this broadcast, we're covering the 30-minute Power on Wheels broadcast. We have the 60-minute, but we also have the 30-minute. We got all the home video footage as well. But I think between the three of us, we agreed that the 30-minute broadcast was the way to go, mainly because I don't think anything changes as far as monster truck coverage on the 60-minute broadcast of the show. We open this thing with a literal bang, gentlemen, as there are two big giant sets of pyro that go off on each lane that we have in the middle of the floor, and then we get to see the trucks coming in. I love these intros, by the way. It's just the complete arena is dark, and they have a spotlight on the trucks as they come out through the tunnel.
Very classic old school intros and just exquisite. I mean, the truck and the dome was an air-filled dome. The dome is held up by air pressure, and so each truck has to come in through the airlock between introductions, and so it kind of drags things out. But each truck gets a full dark intro with the spotlights and everything. I was excited about it as well.
It looks awfully cool. Each truck kind of parading around with the spotlight on them. The driver gets their due, taking their machine out around the floor of the Hoosier Dome, and they kind of speed it up, I'm sure, a little bit here, on the TV broadcast, but I'm sure it took more than a couple minutes to get all those trucks in there.
Oh, it had to have. I mean, you've got 8 monster trucks coming through that tunnel, like Chris was saying, through an airlock to get into the building. There was one thing I didn't like about it, and you guys might jump on me about it, but our live event announcer, Archie Kaufman, he doesn't get introduced on the broadcast, which I found very weird, but I don't know. He's got some very interesting things to say about some of the trucks as they come in there. The big bad Ford, talking about Lone Ranger. And then, of course, he's tough. He's Chevrolet tough when he's talking about Holman's Beast as it comes through there. And I'm also pretty sure he calls Clint Daggett Earl Daggett in the intro for Thumper.
Well, Earl was Clint's dad. So, I mean, he owned the truck, and maybe that's what they put on the spec sheet.
It may have been, yes.
And, every announcer's kind of got their signature. Scott Douglas has the Sirius Elevation Holmes. Army Armstrong's got, the full Boogaloo double throwdown type deal. We've got
unbelievable.
Brett Kepner's unbelievable. Dave Grimm. Bob Breen, oh my God, Bob Breen. Loves Bob Breen from what I hear. And Archie Kaufman, he's tough. Is the Archie Kaufman catchphrase for sure.
That was definitely the first time that I had caught he's tough, and it resonated all through my life. And interestingly, Archie's not even credited in the end credits on the event either, which I thought was interesting. But yeah, Archie in full Archie form, working the floor. And between him and Gary Lee, did a nice job covering the event with no studio production voiceover. Archie, I've got some Archie stories, but Archie's a fun guy. I mean, I did an interview with him one time and asked him a pretty simple question, and I had a 15-minute response on the tape once I looked back at it. Archie definitely has the gift of gab, but that makes for a great announcer, and he had a lot of character, that's for sure.
That he did. I'm not saying he didn't have a lot of character, but man, that catchphrase, he's tough, that gets repeated at least 750 times on this broadcast.
It's
he used it for everybody.
We're talking that this broadcast is basically done live to tape. There's no further editing done in terms of voiceover work. I mean, they're cutting the stuff together, but it's all in live time that they're commentating on this between Archie on the floor and Gary Lee, sidelines, I guess, somewhere, maybe.
Gary's kind of up in the stands almost.
It's an interesting way to produce an event, I must say.
Interesting, and I don't think that we would ever see it again in the sport, to be honest with you. It's just, it's kind of a time capsule almost as far as the sport goes, because you've got the latest and greatest on one side, and you've got some of the trucks that, like like Chris was saying, that are almost essentially show trucks at this point as well. The sport's kind of coming up at this point at this event as this event is being produced here. Last truck to come out for intros is Nightmare. It's got a banner on the side of it. WFMS is a local country station on the fender, 95.5 if you're curious. And then Gary Lee intros us into qualifying right here, and I've put our qualifying results from number 1 all the way down to number 8 here, gentlemen. And of course, top qualifier, Bigfoot number 8 by almost a second over the field, 5.32 qualifying pass right there. Almost clears the first 7 cars, has a bit of an awkward launch. Bigfoot kind of goes left in the air. Suspension soaks up the landing. Brass keeps it straight over the second set and is obviously the smoothest pass we see in qualifying.
Here's the world famous is Bigfoot number 8, Andy Brass in the cockpit. This is the truck of the 90s. The two-frame construction, the only truck of its kind. It utilizes nitrous shocks, no springs on this one. It's a much lighter monster truck, weighs in at about 10,000 pounds. Designer and builder Bob Chandler says it's driver-friendly. And look at Andy Brass on the hammer. Look at the air under Bigfoot 8.
It's definitely the smoothest and the quickest.
Who I think sort of batted a little bit above standard was Steve in Nightmare. Not that Nightmare wasn't always a very competent competitor. Steve actually won a remarkable number of the events that he participated in or was second. Because I've archived all of his collection, his footage, and actually kind of tracked that. And I thought, wow, Steve did a lot better than I think he's given credit for. But he was dead straight down the track all night long, but coming in third, just barely behind Scott Hess in Barefoot, who was driving the wheels off of the truck. I thought that was really impressive.
Is Nightmare Steve Hess from Columbia City, Indiana, in the 1989 Chevrolet, a 510 cubic inch Blonde Chevrolet engine. These are single passes in first round qualifying for the monster truck. And here comes Nightmare, a qualifying run. The flashbulbs ignite the Thunderdome here in downtown Indianapolis. He almost is over, up on the right side, keeps his foot in it, and comes to a stop at the end of the run. Almost rolled it over. It was driver's side up.
Yeah, 6.19 for Barefoot, 6.28 for Nightmare. Very, very similar passes to an extent until Scott hits the second jump anyway. He gets crossed up sideways in the air with Barefoot right there. He doesn't even really make contact with the right front tire. It's just the left front tire that hits the final jump right there. So it makes me wonder if I don't think they counted any penalties in qualifying at all for these guys. Nightmare, like you said, straight right down the track. But that's one thing I'm going to point out about Nightmare on the entire night. He is dead center, dead straight all the way down the track, whereas the truck of the future up there at number 1 qualifier looked awfully squirrely, even though it was the fastest by well over almost a second.
Oh, yeah. It's a big difference. You see the technology and how the suspension soaks up, especially on a course like this where the ramps are pretty steep. The cars are not getting a ton of hits on them because we only have 8 trucks here. So the suspension is going to matter a big difference for Bigfoot 8 because it's a type of track that this truck was designed for.
That's very true. Here's the time discrepancies, though. We get those 3 guys at the top, of course, Bigfoot, Barefoot, Nightmare. Number 4 is Heartbeat at a 9.15. That slows your pace down a considerable amount right there.
3-second difference between the top 3 and then to fourth. I mean, that's where it sets up. All right, this is a 3-truck race. There turn out to be some good races throughout the night. It separates the real race trucks perhaps from some of the still evolving trucks to the just totally a show truck.
Well, you got to think, though, 2 years before this, Heartbeat is in the finals of the Metrodome show. And now it's relegated to 4th in qualifying, 3 full seconds off the pace. That's how fast the sport evolved with a span of 2 years.
Despite the efforts of Brett Engelman with the hot spoiler on the tail of the Heartbeat truck, if you're watching the video, you've got to take a look at it and notice it. I don't know how long he ran that thing, but it kind of looks ridiculous on the back of the truck.
But think of the downforce.
For the aerodynamic advantage, I mean, maybe it helped him a little bit. He's still 4th overall. He's ahead of the rest of the field. But what's really unfortunate is we've got the first victim to fall into the pit here. Hercules doesn't make it over the second set of cars.
All right, here we go on lane number 2, Hercules. Hercules, the 1989 Chevrolet 454. Tim Kessler from Avon, Ohio. Over the first set of cars, he approaches second. He's in trouble. Tim is in trouble. There's a gap between that first and second car as they make the pass, and he has trouble. The first time in the truck in this type of competition. Tim says he's had the truck for some 8 months, but the first time in competition this evening, and he has a problem.
Yeah, he just kind of crawls up onto the first set of cars, rides over them, and then on our second set, it's obvious the truck is having some issues. It appears that the rear tires are not turning, and then we find out later that that is the case. No rear-wheel drive for Hercules, as he just noses straight into that gap right there. One thing that we don't get on the broadcast that we do in the home video footage provided is the guy that hands Tim Tesmer's drive shaft, Bob Chandler, just casually walks up and he's like, "Here you go."
And Tesmer was still new to the truck at that time as well.
Yeah, they
Hess,
say
when
multiple times this is his first event in the truck in this type of racing.
which may or may not be accurate, but to some level, yeah. I mean, it was still early on in ownership for him. I mean, Hess had painted the truck maroon, so he wasn't selling the Barefoot to him. And Scott came out with the Barefoot 5. And so I don't know how much forgiveness to provide to Tesmer, but yeah, he fell first victim, but he was not the last victim at all. Poor Clint Daggett in Thumper, when he came out, he was bouncing all the way down the track. I think he stuffed it in both gaps there on between the cars, and I think he was munching on some steering wheel buffet as well.
He could very well have been. Thumper qualifies 7th, just one spot above Hercules, basically because he made it down the track and Hercules didn't. 14-second pass for Thumper right there. In our home video footage, it's weird. It seems like the truck jumps forward a little bit, and I don't know if that's him pre-staging and just trying to get a launch or what, but then the video cuts. It comes back to him on the line. He starts to take off. Truck dies right there at the line. And then a third attempt, he finally gets it going, and when he does, he noses into that first gap. And I tell you, he wins the award for bumpiest pass of the weekend, probably. He noses in hard. But give it to Clint, though, the 16-year-old youngest monster truck driver in the world at the time, hits that, keeps going straight down the track, and ultimately makes a full pass on the course. So give him a hand right there. He also won an award for most flags on the back of a vehicle for the event. Do you guys know that?
It's a lot of flags.
Hey,
And
sometimes you take whatever award you can get.
And within a few short months, Clint is really going to develop in the seat well, because he goes down to Tampa at the Camel event in February and ends up doing himself a pretty good job at that event. So he grows quickly into the seat, and it's unfortunate that they didn't really stick along with the truck, that much longer. I think that he could have been one of the top leaf spring trucks throughout that whole season.
To round out our field here, number 5 came in with Beast at a 9.30. Bouncy pass, but a straight one. Got to point A to point B without much issue. And Lone Ranger come in at 6th at 11.02. So just to cap everything, Bigfoot, Barefoot, Nightmare, Heartbeat, Beast, Lone Ranger, Thumper, and Hercules round out your field. On the broadcast, though, I did like the qualifying shots that we saw, gentlemen, and that was to get a close-up onto the truck. You would see it launch. Then you would get a wide shot from the left-hand side of the building on the tunnel side, as they would say. You get that nice, long, wide shot, and then you would see the truck come over the finish line from an angled shot, also on the left side of the building, but more facing towards the truck itself. I like the way qualifying was shot, and they did a very good job of covering each truck's pass. They didn't show any jump cuts between trucks.
Yeah, this is a good example of the Lineberger production and how they kind of did things. This was like their signature way that they edited runs together. Now, sometimes they used it to their advantage and would edit runs together that weren't actually the same run. But in this case here in Indy, we're actually getting things as they really happened. They didn't stitch anything together from the outside like they did on so many of their other broadcasts.
I just like that they included the qualifying session in the broadcast without any studio coverage or anything like that. I'm sure they needed to fill time with an 8-truck field, but I enjoyed that they had that. I always enjoyed any broadcast that included qualifying because it was more monster truck footage, honestly.
One thing that happens, though, in our qualifying in the broadcast, we only see the runs of Bigfoot, Barefoot, Hercules, Beast, and Nightmare. The other 3 runs we were thankful enough to have on our home video coverage that we covered for you guys as well. Round 1's going to start off here with I'm just going to say this bracket is incredibly interesting to me with how they formed everything.
Nonsensical.
No, it's not at all. Number 1 is Bigfoot number 8. taking on number 6, Lone Ranger. And you guys will get this whole bracket as we go through it here, but 1v6 in round number 1 right here. Bigfoot's going to take the same lane that it qualified in, that right lane, which is the far lane, and in the left lane is going to be the Lone Ranger machine. Of course, we get the famous, he's tough, he's built Bigfoot tough, yeah, boy, from our announcer Archie right there. Bigfoot goes over the 7-car stack. Lone Ranger hits the ramp, but by that point, at the time he hits that ramp with Lone Ranger, Bigfoot's already booking it down the track over the first set, lining up for the second set. That's how fast 8 was out of the hole.
The Lone Ranger was 11.02. The Lone Ranger, Jay Bauer. All right, here he comes. Ladies and gentlemen, Andy Brass. In the truck of the 90s, ladies and gentlemen, Bigfoot 8, Andy Brass. Get ready to come out right now. He's tough. He's Bigfoot tough. Yeah, boy. Ladies and gentlemen, the Lone Ranger, Jay Bauer. He's tough. Watch this. This Bigfoot built on a tubular frame. He's got 2 foot of travel. 2 foot. Side by side, car crushing, drag racing competition. Look at Andy Brass and Bigfoot number 8. The truck of the 90s. Here comes the Lone Ranger. Oh, an engine drop for the Lone Ranger. Andy Brass climbs on the brakes to prevent from hitting the wall here. There is Jerry Bauer in the Lone Ranger. He had some trouble early on, but never say die. He completes the run.
This also set up the discrepancy between developing technology and older show truck style technology. Between the qualifying pass of Lone Ranger and the performance in the racing pass against Bigfoot, it showed that Lone Ranger is not and never has been a real race truck. Though, sidebar, not really noted in the TV releases, but Bauer did a exhibition car crush at this event. Like, they rolled out, I think it was 4 cars. I don't remember the reason, but they rolled out 4 cars diagonal in the left lane there, kind of in no man's land. He does a superb walking wheelie all the way across the cars and then proceeds to back up and not quite stand it on the nose, but it was a solid 60 or 65 degree angle reverser backwards across the cars. And so Lone Ranger, never a race truck, but definitely had the ability to put on a show in the right situation, and really did a good job at what it needed to do, but not racing.
Yeah, very true right there. I didn't know they did that, actually. That's not in our home video footage. You're slacking on me, Chris. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, I dug out the old family photos today and looked, and I realized, oh yeah, look at that. Lone Ranger Bauer laying it down in some capacity at the event.
Yeah, Lone Ranger was, to me, when I was growing up anyway, that was one of my favorite trucks growing up. Why? It's on 73-inch tires. The only truck in the field, by the way, that's still on 73s, which, credit to Gary Bauer, that's awesome to see, but it's not going to win you any races, especially against Bigfoot number 8 right here. Foot's going to go a 660, which is considerably slower, mind you, than its qualifying pass, and that could prove to be a difference in lane choice a little bit later. Like we said, the race is oddly shot on the broadcast. We see Bigfoot's launch, then we cut to the wide shot onto the floor until our view is obstructed by Lone Ranger's tire. Then we go back to that far corner shot again of Bigfoot finishing. Then we go back to another wide shot of Lone Ranger finishing, which is kind of weird because they show the truck jumping, and then when they cut back to it for another shot, they show the truck jumping again and landing on the cars. That's 5 camera cuts for one race.
Yeah, the thing about Bigfoot's time is if you see it kind of in the background of that one shot, Brass gets pretty far out of shape in no man's land, really has to correct the truck up, and it's lucky that he had such a mismatch in round number 1, because had he been against, a Nightmare or a Barefoot, maybe even a Heartbeat or Beast, there's a chance that they could have put Bigfoot out early.
Yeah, and one thing too here that we missed in between the cuts right there is on our home video footage provided by the Hall of Fame. We actually see that Bigfoot goes on, takes this win, fairly easy matchup for him, but in the other lane, Lone Ranger actually lands so far off to the right that it has to back up and then hit those cars again. Pretty big air, by the way, for Lone Ranger, I must say.
Yeah, pretty good. Even, I mean, the race was over before the first truck.
The race was over
stop.
when they waved the green flag.
Yeah. I mean, Foot was over the first set of cars before Lone Ranger was to the first set of cars. But I was just awestruck by what I can't help but think of as the turntable scratch MTV video style editing on this, where it just feels like we're going all with the truck bouncing back and forth in the cuts, because the production on this one is all over the place.
I think anytime we have any editing like that, I'm just going to splice in that sound clip of you doing the little record scratch so people know what we're talking about. Our next race, number 2, Barefoot taking on Holman's Beast over there. On the broadcast, we see Barefoot takes the far lane, which it's been in all night long. We had a close-up of Barefoot's launch from the floor. Scott Hess leaves nothing on the table on this pass. If you guys do anything from watching this show, clip and watch this pass. This is the most incredible pass of the show as far as I'm concerned. Incredible driving skill and probably a little bit of luck on Scott Hess's side as he gets a horrid bounce off the first set of cars, pops it up onto the nose, rides the nose to the second set, and actually does a complete wheel stand, rides it on the rear tires all the way across the cars. Literally, the only thing that pass, guys, makes you say is, wow.
In the far lane, it's Barefoot with Scott Hess, the 89 Chevy. And in the near lane, Holman's Beast, the 89 Chevy, driven by Bob Holman.
Here he comes the line right now. The young man from the Buckeye State of Ohio, the Beast, Barefoot. All my Chevrolet fans, let's hear it for number 2 man. Chevrolet fans, what about it?
Here comes Barefoot, Scott Hess. Oh, hang on, Scott is back on the hammer, and look at that run. Barefoot may have just done it. Barefoot may have just done it. The Beast in the other lane, the Beast, driven by Bob Holman, but it looks like Barefoot may have just beaten the time turned in earlier by Bigfoot.
There's no luck involved. That's all testicular fortitude that got in.
Oh yeah, grapefruits, baby, grapefruits. I mean, Hess was all right. So this is me reverting back to 7-year-old self at this event. But the two things I remember are, ooh, Bigfoot 8, and what's with this Barefoot truck? Oh my God, he's nuts. And this is still what I see in my head anytime anyone talks about Scott Hess. He's nuts. The truck was just insane. He was out of shape every time, but what he was doing in that truck was simply incredible. And like Matt said, we know the source behind it.
So, Chris, question for you, being at this show, this truck's pretty new for Scott at this time. When you roll into the Hoosier Dome and you see a Barefoot truck that you don't recognize and a driver maybe that you don't know, what's going through your head before and after these kinds of runs happen? Are you disappointed Fred's not there?
So we walk in probably an hour before showtime. There's no pit party or anything, but old school style, the trucks are all lined up along the back wall, and we're looking at, and oh, I don't what's with Barefoot, what they do. And then as we hear they're doing introductions and we hear Scott Hess, I'm like, he drove Hercules, and that's all I remember. Like, that's the last time I saw Scott Hess. And honestly, it was probably the Hoosier Dome 87 show TV broadcast is why I recognized the name, because I hadn't seen the Hart Productions or anything like that. And so I just knew him from Hercules. I'm like, Scott Hess is driving Barefoot, but Hercules is here. And all of a sudden I see these runs, and it's like, I mean, obviously it resonated with me because it's it's one of the few things I strongly remember from that event was Hess was just insane. I'd never seen any truck run like that, let alone barefoot. I mean, Fred was never a slouch, but it's hard to argue anybody's ever driven like Scott Hess, particularly in those days.
I mean, you could really only compare two other drivers that come to my head to the run that Scott Hess right here pulls off, and that's Rod Litzow, who always had his foot to the floor, and Dennis Anderson are the two names that really come to mind as guys that would do a pass like that. That's the two names that come to mind. And now number 3, obviously, right here is Scott Hess. We've covered him before on the show. We did the Cortland, Ohio episode with Parrish a little while back, and in that episode, his driving is incredible. Here, he's got a lot more room to build up. And he's also got dirt ramps, which he did not have in Cortland. I tell you, man, that is just one of the greatest passes in monster truck history. Like I said, if you get the chance, go back and watch it. In the other lane, though, we don't even really see Beast. We basically see a launch and a finish. That's it. We don't see hardly any of the run for Beast. From our home video footage, one thing that jumped out to me was they all want to beat the big boy. They want to beat Bigfoot over there with Archie talking in the background before this race starts. Like I said, it's a point A to point B pass, really, again, for Beast. But, man, he's just got an overwhelming matchup in the other lane.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about the drivers, like Chris said, you're not expecting them. And it's interesting to know that Fred's there in attendance because, boy, the pressure's on even more for Scott to perform. He's representing a brand of one of the originators. You know, Dennis would always talk about how he wanted his drivers to make sure that the fans went home happy because they're expecting to see a Dennis Anderson Gravedigger show.
Mhm.
And he selected his drivers based on their ability to please the fans and push the truck hard. And you have to imagine, you know, Fred's got licensing deals with companies. He's got an image to uphold as well. He's got to make sure that somebody out there representing the Barefoot name is going to do that name justice as well. And boy, I don't know if anybody did it any better than Scott Hess.
One thing to point out here, too, gentlemen, Bigfoot's time was a 6.60. Barefoot was a 6.56. Why is that relevant? Because for some reason, we're going to get number 1 and 2 in qualifying taking on each other in the semifinals. Our next pairing, though, Nightmare, number 3, taking on number 7, Thumper. And I got to tell you, this pass kind of surprised me for both of these guys. This ends up being a pretty close race right here. 16-year-old Clint Daggett, youngest monster driver in the world, showed no fear in qualifying as he draws up against Steve Hess right here, though, in Nightmare. Nightmare is going to be the first of the higher 3 to take the closest lane to us, the near lane, left lane. And he's going to get a whole. Actually, he's not going to get the whole shot. It's going to go to Daggett, but he loses ground shortly after that. Nightmare takes the lead and maintains the lead throughout the rest of the race, but it's pretty close at the finish line between these guys by about a half a truck.
Number 2, the youngest monster truck driver in the world, 16-year-old Clint Daggett out of Hudson, Florida. This is number 2, the 89 Ford, and alongside Nightmare, Steve Hess out of Columbia City, Indiana, with the 89 Chevy. The time to be turned in by Barefoot with Scott Hess at 6.56. Andy Brass and Bigfoot is 6.60. So young 16-year-old Clint Daggett out of Hudson, Florida. In his second full season of monster truck competition, he has a real pepper alongside, but right now it looks like the youngster may have it. Oh! Look at the come from behind victory. Nightmare, Steve Hess. The youngster got the whole shot, but Steve Hess hammered out. He takes the victory.
It was a real good race. Hess, again, straight as an arrow down the track, consistent. I don't have the time here, but again, Hess was looking good and keeping it on the track, which a lot of the trucks were getting squirrely between the sets of cars or hitting a little bit crooked. And so Hess, again, this truck just always seemed to be straight as an arrow. I never really saw the truck too far out of shape.
The thing that's impressive for me on this run, not only does Hess bounce straight like we've been talking about all night, but the way he just kind of bounces into that second set of cars, bounces into the ramp, gets a nice big sky shot, and just annihilates the crush cars when he lands on them. I mean, the things basically explode underneath the weight of the Nightmare Chevrolet.
Yeah, it's the perfect leap, an absolutely perfect leap for a leafer truck. It's a 10-car stack. He lands about 7 cars deep into it with the front tires. The front tires barely come down before the rear, and like Matt said, it's like the crush cars just explode underneath of him when he lands underneath the weight.
And something interesting here on the broadcast is we actually skipped one of the races.
Yeah, the Heartbeat versus Hercules race actually happened before this in the live event, but they rearranged it for some reason during the broadcast. And I don't know the reason, but I couldn't see anything obvious about it.
Yeah, I don't know why they did that, but to each their own, I guess. Maybe there was something that they wanted to show beforehand in that broadcast before they aired this one. I don't know. But like you said, number 4 and number 8 racing right here, Heartbeat and Hercules. Not really much to save right here. Hercules still in front wheel drive only, and Engelman takes the win and the easy pass to the semifinal. For Tesmer's sake, though, he was fast enough in 2-wheel drive to at least clear the gap this time on the second jump.
Now stage the Heartbeat. Fred Engelman from Lowell, Michigan. The 89 Chevy. In the other lane, it's Hercules. Tim Tesmer, his first time in competition with this truck. The Hercules, powered by a 454 cubic inch Chevrolet. The Heartbeat, a 431 big block Chevy. They are now shooting for the time turned in by Barefoot at 6.56. So Barefoot right now is quick. Bigfoot second fast at 6.60. And there's the green light. Here they come. Heartbeat out in front. Locks out just a bit between the cars. Completes the run, and some trouble now for Hercules. Hercules stuck between those 2 sets of junk cars. Here he comes to complete the run.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's give him a big hand, Fred Engelman.
Small victories there, right? Small victories. But I mean, this bracket, I mean, it's almost a TNT style bracket, not a strict drag racing style bracket as far as the way the matchups go, but still with the 1 versus 6 and 2 versus 5, that's out of whack. And the 3 versus 7, 4 versus 8, that matches like the TNT style. But then you'd already alluded to the semifinals. That's all out of whack, with somehow the 1 and 2 facing and then the 3 and 4 facing each other, which we'll get to in a moment. But it's crazy. Something that was not in the broadcast, though, and I'm not even sure of the reason, unless it was just a grudge race, but I don't know if you guys caught it in the home video, but we had a random race amongst 2 of the losers from round 1 where Thumper faced off with Beast after round 1 took place.
Yeah, that was really weird to me when I watched that in the video, the home video footage. I'm like, wait, where does this race come in? At first I thought, is this like a 3rd place race? No, apparently it was either just a grudge race or something, because it had no relevance whatsoever to the actual
5th place race.
Here are 2 guys that are going to run for 5th place. We're not going to run for 3rd at any point at all in this, but by God, we're going to decide 5th place right now, ladies and gentlemen, as we get ready to call this winner. And honestly, in that race, when you watch it on the home video, I can't call who wins. It looks like Thumper, but with the angle of the home video, it's really hard to tell.
It's a good race.
Possibly one of the best races of the night. And there were some good races, but yeah, it's a tough one to call, but hard to explain what's going on there.
Speaking of tough to call, now we're into the semifinals here, and we're going to get a little bit of a controversy. It seems like here on the Retro Monster Truck Review, every time we cover Bigfoot versus Barefoot, there's always some sort of controversy that comes along with it. Bigfoot's your number 1 qualifier, but Barefoot had the faster time in round 1 between the 2. So Scott Hess is going to get his lane choice, and he's going to get the far lane, which is a right lane. He's kicking Bigfoot to a lane it hasn't been in all night long. And I got to tell you guys, this is just, it's the way they're hyping this up. It's seeming like this is going to be an event right here between these 2 vehicles.
I mean, this was the finals right here. I mean, even in the semifinals, this is the finals happening. This is the race that I remember the most. I mean, the two Bigfoot versus Barefoot matchups, which spoiler, sorry,
Spoiler alert.
but yeah, I mean, these two matching up, it was hand wringing, sitting in the stands, all the nervous energy that a 7-year-old can provide. As I was a Bigfoot guy back in the day, and I was a brass guy back in the day, and I was excited about this crazy new Bigfoot 8. We had seen it debut at the Jamboree a couple months before, or no, it was what, 2 or 3 weeks before, and hadn't really seen it do anything, hadn't seen it race or anything, and we're really curious when we saw it, and well, this was exciting here.
That it was. This is technically a stage 2 truck taking on what would be, like, well, I like to say it many times in the show, the truck of the future right here with Bigfoot number 8. You kind of wonder who's going to be able to get what in this race. And I got to tell you guys, it's a little bit unexpected to me to see the result that we get here. Scott Hess leaves the line hard. He's actually got a little bit of a lead on Bigfoot. He jumps the cars
on the line.
Yeah, he smoked Andy on the line. But in the middle of no man's land, that's where Bigfoot gains ground. However, Bigfoot completely misses the last set of cars, while Hess barely gets the left front tire on his set. It's going to be ruled here that they both technically missed the jump. To me, though, as a guy that's watched the sport and does a lot of RC racing and stuff, at least in our rules anyway, if you hit one tire on the jump, it's a 2-second penalty for our stuff. If you miss the jump, it's a 4-second penalty. To me, Barefoot wins this round right here. But we're not calling the event. We're like 31, 32 years in the later, so we can't really say it. To me, it's Barefoot wins, but they're going to call it, I think, appropriately by saying both trucks basically miss the second set of cars.
This could be the greatest competition of the evening. It is Barefoot against Bigfoot, Chevrolet against Ford. Barefoot with Scott Hess out of Auburn, Indiana, had the quickest time in the first round at 6.56. Bigfoot was just a tick behind at 6.60 as the crowd erupts. It's Ford against Jimmy. Here they are. Look at the air of those trucks. Barefoot in trouble, almost on its side. How are they going to call it? They did not come down on the cars on the second group of junkers. How are they going to call it? How will the officials see it? Were both those trucks legal? We are waiting, you are waiting, and 50,000 people here in the Hoosier Dome are waiting. Who won it? Who won it? Ford or Chevrolet? The officials have decided to bring him back for another run. Oh my! Not once, but twice tonight in the Hoosier Dome. Bigfoot and Barefoot will go at it side by side.
Yeah, I mean, both trucks are definitely on kill. You can tell that Andy and Scott both want to win this for their respective bosses, and both trucks are way out of shape. And I have to agree that the right call was made to probably send these guys back, take a quick break, run the next race, get these guys back and rerun it and find a legitimate winner, because both trucks were so out of shape. You can't really call either of them a legitimate run. Hess, he gets, I think, maybe 1 out of all 4 tires up that ramp. So it's still hard to say it's even remotely a legal run. And if you're missing the cars at that point, it's probably just considered a DQ, I'm guessing. So it's a big way for them to not only give the fans the top 2 trucks that they came to see again, but kind of build that story a little bit more. And the drama just continues to build throughout the night. And Chris, what was the environment like there in the dome that night? Was everybody on the edge of their seat for this race?
I mean, this was the moment of the night. The electricity, you could feel it. You could feel the tension in the air, because you could feel Archie's there. I mean, he's building things up. He knows Bigfoot versus Barefoot, and so he's building this thing up as much as possible. He knows they're both going for each other's throats, and I'm going to agree with Matt here. Old school rules. Whether you missed one tire up the ramp or 2 tires up the ramp, you were disqualified. And so Scott made a, we could call it more legal run if you wanted to.
That was my point. I feel like he made a less of an illegal run than Bigfoot.
Right. I mean, it's like in video games. Well, you were down on the apron and you cut the corner. Well, I just turned at the starting line and went to the back stretch across the infield. I mean, it's illegal altogether. And so I think it was a great idea to just rerun the thing, because that was an insane race, but it was a mess at the same time. But wow, was it a spectacle, because you could see both trucks just on kill.
And you could see the crowd, too, very into it in the background as well. I got to say, that's probably one of my more favorite races to watch, mainly because if you look in the crowd behind them, you can see the crowd reacting big time to this race. This, like you were saying, this is the main event. This is the showstopper, if I can borrow some lines from Shawn Michaels when we move into our next race right here. But man, like I said, that this is what they paid for, this is what they came to see, and this is exactly what the crowd's going to get, and they're going to get it twice in one night.
Yeah, and what's cool is we get to see George Carpenter kind of explaining to Scott Hess, well, he's holding up one finger and 2 fingers, probably explaining that, hey, you had to hit the jump with both front tires and get over it. And we see Scott get back in the truck, and they say, all right, we're going to bring them back in 10 minutes, probably to let the trucks and maybe their heads cool down a little bit, to come back and rerun this. And it looks like they're excited to go back out there on the track and settle it on the course.
Number 3
They were pretty forgiving in qualifying on the 2-wheel rule, but once they got into actual eliminations, they got pretty consistent, and I think that'll rear its head again as we discuss through this.
Number 3 and number 4, Heartbeat and Nightmare taking on each other here. Honestly, 2 very similar looking trucks. I would say Nightmare's got a little bit of an advantage height-wise. It's a little lower than Heartbeat at this point. And I got to say, Heartbeat, too, has probably got a really good advantage on the back. That spoiler we were talking about, that's going to cut at least 0.2 of a second on the downforce with this vehicle. I'm kidding. I'm very much kidding right there. This race, though, is probably the worst and most poorly shot of the show. I thought camera cuts back and forth. We never really get to see the race in its entirety. We cut from Heartbeat's launch to Nightmare going over the first stack. And then we hear, look at the air under the Heartbeat truck, even though we're looking right at Nightmare on the broadcast. Made no sense to me. We never see a full clip on the broadcast as we're focused on Nightmare by that point. In No Man's Land, we do see Heartbeat is a little bit ahead, but Brett is bouncing so much between the cars that even though he does get both front tires up onto the next jump, the truck's just lost all momentum at that point, whereas Nightmare is just booking it to the finish line.
All right, lined up side by side, it's Heartbeat, Brett Engelman. Heartbeat in the far lane. In the near lane, Nightmare with Steve Hess. A pair of 1989 Chevrolets. Nightmare out of Columbia City, Indiana. Heartbeat out of Paul, Michigan. Here they are. Look at the air under Heartbeat. Heartbeat, but it looks like coming right at our cameras. Nightmare comes from behind to win it. Nightmare, Steve Hess out of Columbia City, Indiana. A 510 cubic inch flowing Chevrolet power plant in the 89 Chevrolet body. And Nightmare takes the victory in side-by-side competition in round 2.
Yeah, another smooth sailing. It was a good race. And I guess from a production standpoint, I get, it seems like a lot of their effort is trying to show all of the action of almost both trucks, even if it throws the timeline out of whack. And it certainly does on several occasions, and this being one of them. But it really was a good race, and maybe one of you can provide some more insight on this, but I believe Nightmare is a notably newer truck. Is the Heartbeat truck still basically the
Heartbeat's the exact same as it was in 1988.
That's kind of what I was thinking.
It's just different paint job, and of course, spoiler.
Well, I mean, don't underestimate the spoiler. Plus, he's with the times. He's got the neon rolling. I mean, he's got that late 80s, early 90s vibe going there, and so
Also, I don't want to hear this. I'm going to make this very clear to all Monster Patrol fans. Heartbeat had the spoiler first, okay? Okay.
That's right.
Wait, don't forget Equalizer. I mean, Equalizer
Oh,
had
yeah,
a
darn it,
Engelman
Equalizer,
style
almost forgot.
spoiler too.
Yeah, he was rocking the spoiler long before Monster Patrol, okay? No, I'm just kidding. I'm just throwing some shade on Monster Patrol fans. 7-second pass for Nightmare right here. But like I said, our home video footage shows the full story. As Heartbeat lands between the sets of cars, the front tires get to bouncing upwards into a wheel stand, which causes Brett to have to chase the truck, whereas Nightmare just lands smooth as silk and just goes straight on to your final round. Then we come back into the rematch, number 1 and number 2 again, Bigfoot and Barefoot. I cannot help, guys, but chuckle at the choice of music that they play right here. It almost sounds like a mix or a remix of the Benny Hill theme song as they're getting ready to line up.
I didn't catch that. Wow.
As long as we bring you monster truck competition, you will never, ever see a better shootout than what you're going to see right here, the second time around. Barefoot, the Chevy. Bigfoot, the Ford. They went side by side. It was too close to call. The official said, go back, rest for 10 minutes, and do it again.
These two races totally overshadow the other semifinals race, even though the other semifinals race was a really good race, actually.
Yes, it was.
But it just didn't have the excitement level and then the grudge that was furthered by the we're going to run them again approach that was taken to this. And so, again, sitting with bated breath as these two prize fighters line up and start slugging.
Yeah, and guess what, guys? At home, ladies and gentlemen, nothing's changed. These trucks are still on kill. They're both going for it hard. And boy, both trucks are still not totally under control by the time they get to the end of the race course.
It's not totally under control, but it's a much cleaner pass from both trucks right here. Honestly, I can't call a winner between the two. It's a very poorly edited race. We cut midway through Bigfoot's launch to Barefoot in the air over the first 7 cars. We stay on Barefoot from that point as Scott Hess honestly has another wild and crazy run. He lands hard on the rear, the similar bounce that he had in his round 1 pass. This time the truck, though, doesn't get that perfect wheel stand, but it gets a similar jump than what it just had, but both front tires hit the jump this time.
The editing on the broadcast conveyed all of the excitement, but made it difficult to really understand what was happening as far as a finish went. And then they proceeded to show the wrong replay. They're filming the big screen, the Jumbotron in the Hoosier Dome. And at first they showed the replay from the prior race. And that's what they put on the broadcast. So that helps nothing. In the home video, right after they showed that original replay, they show the replay of the race that just happened. From the home video, we're sitting at a corner view on the same side that the broadcast is shot from. So we're almost down by the tunnel. So we don't have perfect angles. It's a close race. The only thing I will say is 8 came off the cars, all 4 tires off the cars before the end of the stack. And so I don't know if that had any impact on the call, because it almost looked like 8 might have been ahead. The finish line was between the second and third car from the end of the stack and the second stack. And so we're looking at imperfect angles, and we're Monday morning quarterbacking. But it's a really hard race to judge. I don't know if they penalized Bigfoot for going off the cars, but it was a crazy race.
The far lane, it's Barefoot with Scott Hess. In the near lane, Bigfoot, Andy Brass. Barefoot, the Chevrolet. Bigfoot, the Ford. All right, here it is. Their times through the first round. Very close. Here they are. Here they are. Andy Brass in trouble. Hang on, Andy. Oh, and he gets her stop as the fans down here start to back out of their seats. Oh, who won that one? Who won that one? The Ford fans say Bigfoot won it. The Chevy fans say Barefoot won it. Who won it? Are we going to do it again? How many times can these guys run and come down on all fours?
That it was. Gary Lee actually goes on to the whole who won it scenario. I actually revert back to the home video, and we see that replay. The first replay that we see is obviously the wrong race. Then they bring up the actual race that we just saw. And the one thing that really makes it an undetermining factor as to who wins the race is the fact that we don't see half of Bigfoot. They actually cut out the first half of Bigfoot 8 right here. So you can't see when the truck is crossing the finish line, whereas you can clearly see Hess in the other lane. It's unfortunate that there is no good side angle of this because you can't tell. It is flat out. You cannot tell who won that race. But I'm going to guarantee you one thing. If you go ask Bob Chandler who won that race, he's going to say Bigfoot. If you go ask Fred Schaefer who won that race, he's going to say Barefoot. If you go ask Andy Brass, he's going to say Bigfoot. If you go ask Scott Hess, he's going to say Barefoot. That's one of those things.
Josh Rhodes, he's going to say Gravedigger.
No, I'm not going to say Gravedigger. Dennis wasn't here, okay? I'm not going to say that. However, he did win later on down the road in Indianapolis, and we will cover one of those shows eventually, all right?
Another time, another day.
So I'm looking at the footage, guys, from the home video, and I'm doing the best I can to kind of match this up frame by frame. I'm going to go ahead with the experience I have, and I did get an A in 10th grade geometry. I'm going to say that Barefoot did get to the line first, because as I freeze frame this, as Bigfoot's coming off the side of the cars, I'm matching him up at about the third car from the end of the stack, and Barefoot's over top of the last car. So I think Hess really did get to the line first, regardless of whether Bigfoot would have received a DQ or not. He did have the straighter run and a much more faster approach up the second set of cars, whereas Andy's kind of gathering the truck up. Scott basically glances the truck off of the ramp because he's bouncing again, and it keeps the rear of the truck obviously much lower, and Andy gets a full launch.
Yeah.
I think Barefoot does actually get to the line first, because as Barefoot's on the down ramp, Andy is fully on the ground, kind of next to maybe the last car, maybe the car before it. So I'm calling Barefoot to the line first, a straight up victory.
So
Either way, there are 20 to
3 actually calls
30,000 fans that won that race. I mean,
Yes, exactly.
Oh, yeah, and that's something that I kind of wanted to point out. We see it on the broadcast in a couple spots. The Dome, most of the time when you would see a monster truck event here, we just had the lower bowl filled. And the upper bowl is probably upwards of 50% full at this event. This is a big time draw for special events, and it's the first time that they're in this venue, I think, right?
yes.
So, TNT had this November date prior, and they kind of, for whatever reason, don't have it for 89, and Special Events picks it up and goes on with the Monster Truck Thunder Drags for many, many years, at least another decade plus a few. So it's a kind of a big effort, I'm sure, from Special Events to promote this thing, and they got the people in that night, no doubt about it.
That they certainly did. They had quite the crowd there at the RCA Dome. In fact, I was just about ready to point out myself. Drama, though, continues, though, from this race, as we see just a quick glimpse as Barefoot and Bigfoot drive by. We see the front drive shaft hanging out of Barefoot. And honestly, if you watch some of his passes, I'm not sure he's even in two-wheel drive for most of the night anyway, just by watching some of Barefoot's launches. But as he drives past right here, you see the front drive shaft hanging down from the axle. They go back to the pits a little bit later. You see them basically pulling off the piece that would be debris if they left it on there, pull that drive shaft off. Barefoot's going to run two-wheel drive in this semifinal round here, and I think that, in this final round here against Steve Hess. We got the Hess and Hess show in the final round here. We got number 2 versus number 3 in qualifying. Barefoot's going to have lane choice, 6.25 to a 7.0 time. And I got to tell you, this is it's going to be an interesting final, boys.
2 Chevrolets in the final, and it's a Chevrolet-sponsored show. So the sponsors went out on the night, which is important for the event, to be a success in the eyes of the sponsors and the management team. So good on those guys. We've got 2 Chevys in the finals. And the big difference, like you're saying, Hess only in two-wheel drive. It's not going to stop trying. Well, yeah, Scott, I got to be. Yeah.
Now, is he in two-wheel drive? Because looking at the freeze frame here, it looks like it's a stabilizer bar. Now, I'm not going to say that he's 100% because you can't see it in the broadcast in the finals, and we'll touch on it in a second, but I think there's still something up with the front drive line. The way he's driving throughout the night, that doesn't necessarily surprise me, but I see it looks like it is a front stabilizer bar because there's the we'll call it shock absorber in the end of the piece hanging down there, and so it may not have been a drive shaft. But
you could be right, but I don't know. I just when I saw the angle that they had of Barefoot here in the finals, it looked to me like it didn't have a front drive shaft in it.
Okay, I haven't looked at the finals, but certainly could be. And I guess with no further ado, since we're dancing around everything, I mean, you look at the finals. To me, the way the broadcast is put together versus the way it looks on home video are dramatically different.
Very different. I put it in my notes here, if there was a Razzie Award for worst edited monster truck race, it would go to this one or the one that I had mentioned earlier with just so many jump cuts in it. We've got, like I said, Hess versus Hess, Nightmare versus Barefoot. Barefoot, like we said, we believe is in two-wheel drive in the far lane, in the lane he's been in all night, whereas in the near lane, it's where Nightmare's been all night. It's two trucks getting the lane that they want. It's a shame this is edited so poorly because we don't really get much of a race that we're shown right here. We see Gary Lee talk about Nightmare. We're focused in on the massive air from Barefoot in the other lane, but Gary Lee is talking about, look at the air on Nightmare. He gets barely any air over the final jump,
especially compared to Barefoot.
Yeah, and there's really exactly the Barefoot truck almost clears the entire pass. I think Gary in his head wanted to say Barefoot. It just came out in Nightmare for some reason. That's just my call on that. The reason that I'm all over the place on this is because the editing's all over the place. We don't see a clear-cut winner here. We just immediately hear, oh, Nightmare wins from Gary Lee, but we don't see the actual, like, what happened in the race because it's very confusing. They just immediately call Nightmare the winner. He also say that Nightmare may have set a Guinness Book of World Records for the second launch onto the cars. But I think he met Barefoot.
The Ford fans have been disappointed because Bigfoot has been knocked off by Barefoot. So in the final, Scott Hess in Barefoot, the 1989 Chevrolet against Nightmare, the 1989 Chevy out of Columbia City, Indiana, Steve Hess. So a pair of Hoosiers, Steve Hess in Nightmare and Scott Hess in Barefoot. They're staring at 225 feet on Indiana and jump cars. Here they come. Look at the air on Nightmare. Nightmare takes the victory. Did you see the altitude of Nightmare? Nightmare may have set a Guinness Book of Records in clearing that second batch of cars. The air under Nightmare was incredible.
Ladies and gentlemen, the winner, Nightmare!
5 inches, Nightmare takes the victory for the monster trucks here in the Hoosier Dome.
Ladies and gentlemen, this young man has got to be proud of this moment.
I sure am. Scott's a hell of a competitor, and I couldn't believe it. I don't know what happened, but I'm just glad to be on top.
Well, I'll tell you right now, he got off the cars on one side. You drove a good straight race. If you come back, got that fuel straightened out, and I'm going to tell you, young man, you had a fine show here tonight. We're mighty proud of you. The people in Indianapolis are proud of you. Thank you very much. Steve Hess.
The way it was cut, also, and again, I think this may have been one of those efforts of Lineberger to show all the action again, and it doesn't work out in the scheme of putting together a palatable timeline because it shows Barefoot distinctly hitting the second obstacle first, because then they want to cut back to Nightmare and show him hitting that second obstacle as well, which makes it look like he's way behind. And so you throw the timeline completely out. The race starts, it's not ISO'd on Nightmare, but you can't see Barefoot because of the pulling track in the middle, the too wide pulling track. And so it's a very wide but isolated shot, and then they call Nightmare the winner. And I was always perplexed by that until I finally acquired the home video of it, and you start looking at it and things start clicking into place, because you see because from our angle down on the corner in the the end zone. You see Barefoot take off, full boogaloo, double showdown style. But the
He's
truck
tough.
hooks.
Remember, he's tough.
He's Chevy tough. He's Chevy
He's
tough. He's also
barefoot
monster truck. Right. And he's barefoot tough. But he takes a hard left. And so that's why I was kind of wavering on the whole drive line thing when we were talking about it a moment ago. I thought he had a broken axle, and that caused the truck to twist on the starting line. And so Hess misses the first obstacle with the front two tires. And I think that turns out to be the key moment in this race, because
I think that's
Scott
the reason.
Hess,
I think that's the reason that he loses the race. It's just not made very well clear to anyone watching the broadcast that that's what happens. As we said, in the Hall of Fame footage that we got, the truck goes hard left on the line. The right front tire is the only one that makes it up over the first hill. He kind of rides the two right side tires over the cars. That gets straight for no man's land and just gives this bonsai barefoot launch that Hess is known for. And I got to tell you, he's first one to the finish line. But again, I think that is, I mean, he's first to finish line by a mile, I think, over Nightmare. But again, doesn't hit that first set of cars. Penalty ensues. Nightmare gets the win, and it is not made clear to anybody on the broadcast that that's what happened. They're just made clear that, hey, you know what? Nightmare won the race.
Yeah, and it's good that we had this footage to see, because even on the Jumbotron video that they show on the TV broadcast, you can see that Barefoot's ahead. And it always was confusing to me. It's like, how in the world did they call Nightmare the winner? Because it made no sense. And here we see on our footage that we're looking at here from the corner that I'd say it's maybe a questionable call. Barefoot kind of gets up the beginning of the ramp with the left front, but he certainly doesn't get fully up on that first set of cars. Hit the left front pops up in the air, but he was kind of glancing off the ramp, and that was enough for them to call the race in Steve Hess's favor, apparently. So it's, what I noticed here is a lot of people in that upper deck are gone by the finals.
Yeah, I noticed that too. I couldn't understand why that would happen before the final round, but as we were talking earlier, they kind of got what they probably thought was the final anyway in the previous round between Bigfoot and Barefoot. They got it twice, and I think that's what they came to see. And at that point, I don't think that maybe those people up in the upper deck just didn't care about the win, didn't care about the event win at that point.
Well, Josh, you haven't been there, but Chris and I obviously have at the Hall of Fame in Indiana. We know that things close at like 8 o'clock. It's our bedtime.
This is true. Yes, this is true.
And honestly, this is where my memory and 30 years passing affect me, but I don't even know if we stayed for the finals. In retrospect, we may have seen Barefoot and Bigfoot come back up again and gone, okay, this was the finals. Maybe we didn't. I really don't know. But it's possible we could have seen it that way and left. I don't know. You've also
we're gonna actually pause the show right here for a second. We're gonna ask Chris to go meditate and channel his 7-year-old self so he can remember this.
Well,
right.
Or find those photos he was looking at earlier.
Yeah, that too.
Yeah. Nothing like point and shoot 200 speed film from 1989, possibly held by a 7-year-old pointed at the track. So not a lot of great information conveyed there, but there's a lot of blur. But old school style monster truck shows, it's possible this was pushing 11 o'clock, 11:30 at this point, because we had 24 pulling trucks there. And based on what I've seen more recently, I don't know if it carried the same back then, but every 3 or 4 trucks, they're grooming the track for 15 minutes. And so this could easily have drug out to a very long event, and people just start rolling out. And if they did, they did miss a good finals. Another good race. You had 2 Indiana guys, so at least the Indiana guys had taken down all of the foreigners in this race, and so either way, a hometown guy was going to win. But yeah, I think the only hint at the call that was made on Barefoot, and I only know this because I've seen the home video. Archie says, because it's a live interview with Steve Hess after the race, they're talking. I think Steve says something along the lines of, "I don't know what was going on with Scott," and Archie kind of almost half mumbles, which Archie doesn't really mumble, but yeah, I think you had a good straight pass and he was a little off the cars. Like, oh, that didn't click until recently when I put 2 and 2 together. All right, I think they probably penalized Scott because he was clearly to the finish line first.
Yeah, Scott was clearly to the finish line first right there. Like I said, the broadcast is edited so awkwardly. It is unreal. But at the same time, I think that everybody remembers Scott Hess from this show much more than they remember anything else from this show. Just because of his number one, the wild passes that he had, and number two, the fact that he does technically take down Bigfoot.
The new unbeatable Bigfoot at that time.
Yeah, very true.
He had to have made Fred happy.
He definitely did. He definitely had to have made Fred happy on that one. Honestly, just looking back at it, I think you could, like Parrish was saying earlier, I think that your final round was Bigfoot and Barefoot. No matter which race you want to talk about, I think that was your final round, and that's what people paid to come and see. By the time the final round came around, I don't know that Fred would have been even upset at that point that Barefoot technically lost. I think he was happy
didn't care if he won the event. He just wanted to beat Bigfoot in every situation ever.
I mean,
especially in the fact that the truck is wounded at that point, So at that, you could say, oh, well, you don't expect to win the finals. The truck's broken. But I'm looking at a newspaper article here advertising for the event. And Chris, do you remember the human bomb? Danny Reed was at this event. Do you remember a big loud boom that night?
I don't remember a bit of that. I might have to pull the photos out here. I've got them scanned and the folder pulled up, but I don't recall that. I don't recall that in the television advertisements either. I think I've got some TV spots from this event, but don't recall that being advertised. But I'm not seeing it.
Is he related to Ahmed the Dead? Never mind.
We've got the human bomb. We've also got, they're saying jet-powered funny car racing, which Tim once was there.
I was going to say, I have a dark and blurry photo of what looks like Starfire or Green Monster. Basically, I thought, yeah, this looks like one of Arfon's funny car fire tractors, or fire two-wheel drive pullers.
Tractors. That's a new term.
Yeah. Hey.
Rounding out the show, we've got four-wheel drive modified truck drag race sled pulling, which was pretty cool. And my hero in pulling, Gene Fanny and Gone AWOL, the pride of Derry, Pennsylvania, right up the road from me, a legend in this area for the pulling scene. The Gone AWOL truck always looking beautiful.
Yeah, I'm not much for pulling typically, but I did think this one deserved some mention, and it is featured in the 60-minute television broadcast. But this was not traditional truck and tractor pulling. This was dual lanes, side by side, essentially drag racing pulling. They were going for time down the track, not for distance. I mean, full pull was nearly a given in this event, and you were going for that 9-second pass that I think ultimately won it.
And it was eliminations, was it not?
I don't know if it was eliminations. I think they did 2 rounds of pulling. Each truck came out twice, so again, pushing the clock even later in the evening, but best time wins over those 2 rounds.
Okay. Well, what's cool about this is that this is one of the events, at least in my world. I was 3 days old on the day of this event, November 11th, 1989, in the Hoosier Dome. So, Chris, you're there enjoying it with your family, and I'm probably just screaming and sleeping.
I'm probably playing with my Hot Wheels on the floor at this point. Actually, I take that back. Matchbox monster trucks playing on the floor at this time with the monster trucks there. But this event overall, gentlemen, the racing to me is fantastic. I mean, the trucks themselves put on one heck of a show. It's a shame that the people that put the broadcast together couldn't seem to focus on the actual race and put everything together for this show to make it look like a semi-sensible racing broadcast. And to me, that brings it down in the rating. I gave it a 4 out of a 10 basically giving a -1 to the actual broadcasting and the way that it was put together.
Yeah, it's interesting. Chris, you're our guest. You were at the event now, so we've got to deduct at least 3 points off of your score to get what it really is.
He's just saying that because me and Robbie voted really highly for Minneapolis 03.
Well, yeah, I mean and my Pittsburgh was always like an 18 out of 10. So you have to take that into account. So Chris,
Okay.
what do you rate this monster truck thunder drags in the dome?
Yeah, I've got sentimentality affecting my judgment here, so yeah, my scoring will have to be taken with a grain of salt. But for me, this was the first big event to see Bigfoot 8 in true action, racing action, and then having my first experience with Scott Hess and Barefoot on a legit track. Like some of the tracks in the Hoosier Dome would later go, particularly to the USA events, would become single set drag races where they're not utilizing the full availability of space in the dome, and so they did that here, and everybody was really laying it down. Interestingly, though, the track construction to me kind of always bothered me, even as a 7-year-old. Like the ramps were there, and it was great that they had dirt ramps, but they weren't groomed, and they had just kind of broken up hay bales strung around the track, and it just kind of made it look a little bit trashier. And so you had great content. The broadcast was very confusing based on just the cuts that were made, but I was ecstatic when I found this on TV. I was shocked. This was not aired on our ABC, CBS, NBC, or Fox affiliates. This was TTV4. I guess you might call it the CW if you have if you're or WGN if you're Chicago region or something like that. It was local and more unaffiliated. And we just happened to catch that this was on. I never would have thought that this would be on TV, because I did know what TNT and USHRA were, and I knew this wasn't that, because I had not seen any of the other Challenge of Power broadcasts. And so to find this home event almost blindly was huge. And so trying to be conservative here, broadcast aside, I would give the event a 7 or 8 out of 10, but the broadcast brings it down, understandably.
Yeah, I'm going to go in the same direction as both of you guys. The event itself is really good quality live entertainment for the people that are there in person, like Chris and everyone else who was there that night. And kind of to spin off of what you were saying, Chris, yeah, this show, Power on Wheels, I guess they called it Challenge of Power when it was on ESPN, and then Wheel Power later on in further syndication. But yeah, this was a regional sports network kind of thing that must have been sold at different places. I'm picking through listings here. I see it was aired on the MSG network in New York, and I think we got it on KBL here in the Pittsburgh area. It was like that regional sports type of environment, and that's what a lot of markets were getting this show in. So definitely something you'd stumble across in a lot of cases and weren't expecting, as Chris mentioned. So getting back to the rating on this one, great event, and like you guys said, pretty rough on the editing job. Gary Lee solo hosting the TV side of it with Archie doing the live event is an interesting twist. I'm not sure it works that well. Lineberger seemed to always kind of capture the live mic feed somehow for their broadcasts, and it was something that pervaded through all of their shows. Even when they were doing the early Power Track stuff, it was Dave Grimm and Army on the live mic, and that's what you got, with a little bit of voiceover work kind of introducing each race, but the play-by-play is live, and that, I think, really hurts the quality of the broadcast when you're taking the live floor mic and translating on the TV, because they're two very different audiences. When you have somebody there live doing a TV broadcast, it's great stuff, like we've talked about on the Retro Monster Truck Review with the USA Motorsports show in Des Moines, and it works in that instance, but here it really doesn't. I'm going to have to stick with my co-host here, Joshua, and say it's probably a 4 out of 10 as a complete package on television. I agree that the rating is higher, of course, for the live event.
As Parrish rolls his eyes in the back. No, I'm kidding.
So what do we got next week, Josh?
Next week, I believe it's Monster Trucks 2000 again?
Oh, yeah, the new Thrillenium. It's something you're not going to want to miss.
That's very true. Thank you. I've got to throw out there really quick. Thanks to Chris. He's going to join us next week as well. By the way, ladies and gentlemen, you'll get a double dose of Parrish on the Retro Monster Truck review. I hope you all enjoy that. Is there anything you need to plug, Chris? Anything you'd like to talk about?
Hey, make sure that you are getting your tickets for the Monster Truck Hall of Fame induction ceremony coming up. I believe it is the November 11th and 12th weekend. I'm sorry, the November 12th and 13th weekend in Butler, Indiana at the new facility, new museum. So make sure to check that out. Make sure to follow the Monster Blog and Mean Duck Productions on Facebook. But always a pleasure to be on here, Josh and Matt. Love being a part of the show and just talking some old school monster trucks.
It's good stuff.
Oh, it's great stuff. We'll see y'all again on the tracks across America.
Bigfoot ain't got beat.